There comes a moment in life, quiet, almost invisible, when you sit with yourself long enough to hear the truth you've been avoiding, that every time you minimized your feelings for someone else's comfort, every time you stayed silent when something inside you was breaking, every time you allowed people to take more from you than you were able to give, you weren't being kind, you were abandoning yourself. And it never happens suddenly. It happens slowly, over years, in small moments that pretend to be harmless. Letting someone interrupt your boundaries because you don't want to seem difficult, allowing disrespect because you're scared to lose the connection, giving more than you receive because you're afraid that if you stop, everything will fall apart. But what you eventually realize in the quiet honesty of your own thoughts is that nothing in this world is worth losing your inner stability for. Not love, not family, not belonging, not the illusion of peace that exists only when you're the one carrying all the weight. And as this realization settles into your chest, something begins to shift, not aggressively, not loudly, but in a grounded, steady way, like the slow realignment of something that has been bent for far too long. You begin noticing that your self-worth is not a decoration you wear on good days. It's the filter through which your entire life flows. The people you allow close, the treatment you accept, the energy you exchange. Everything rises or falls depending on how deeply you value yourself. And once you understand that your peace is the core of your existence, the foundation of your clarity, your choices, your relationships, you stop letting anyone walk through your life with muddy shoes. You start choosing yourself in ways that feel new, unfamiliar, but undeniably right. And with that, we enter the first truth, the one that quietly shapes the rest of your life. 1. Your self-worth sets the standard for every relationship. When you begin to observe your relationships with calm honesty, you start to see something you once missed. People respond to the value you place on yourself long before they respond to the value you place on them. It's not arrogance, and it's not ego. It's the quiet architecture of human behavior, the unspoken rules that determine who stays, who leaves, and how deeply they enter your life. When your self-worth is low, your boundaries soften, your voice weakens, your expectations shrink, and you begin to accept versions of love and attention that do not reflect who you truly are. You tolerate inconsistency because you want connection. You excuse disrespect because you want harmony. You absorb emotional weight because you want peace. And without noticing, you start living at a discount, offering your depth at a price that does not honor its value. But something shifts the moment you truly understand that your worth is not measured by how much you endure, but by how gently you protect the parts of yourself that the world has taken for granted. You start to sense the difference between presence and convenience, between affection and attachment, between connection and emotional dependency. You begin to notice how your body reacts around certain people, how some bring tension while others bring ease, how some drain you while others steady you. And slowly, with a kind of softness that doesn't need permission, you begin to realize that you have the right to expect more clarity, more honesty, more effort, more reciprocity, more respect. Not because you're entitled to it, but because you were never meant to survive on the leftovers of other people's emotional capacity. Your self-worth becomes the quiet compass that guides you. It changes the way you speak. Your voice becomes steadier. It changes the way you choose. You no longer move toward people who offer half of themselves. It changes the way you walk, more grounded, more aware, more unwilling to shrink yourself just to fit into someone else's comfort. You begin to understand that protecting your worth doesn't mean being cold. It means being conscious. It means recognizing that your time, your energy, your heart, these are not limitless resources. They are sacred, and not everyone deserves access to them. And when this shift happens, people notice it even before you tell them. They sense that your boundaries are no longer suggestions. They sense that your kindness is no longer something they can lean on without offering something back. They sense that the version of you who tolerated too much is gone, replaced by someone who knows their value in a quiet, unwavering way. Before you move forward, ask yourself, gently, honestly, if I truly valued myself the way I deserve, what behaviors would I immediately stop accepting? Sit with that question. Let it settle. Let it reveal the first doorway to a different life. Because maybe this is where everything begins to change. 2. Protecting your inner peace is not selfish. It's survival. There comes a time when you finally understand that peace is not something you wait for, or something you stumble into when life happens to be gentle with you. Peace is something you build, something you protect, something you choose, even when everything around you tries to pull you back into the noise you've spent years fighting your way out of. And what's surprising is that this understanding doesn't arrive in a moment of strength. It usually shows up in a moment of exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after years of showing up for people who rarely show up for you, after carrying responsibilities that were never yours to carry, after silencing your needs so often that you forget what it feels like to listen to yourself. Peace doesn't announce itself, but the lack of it does. In the heaviness you wake up with, in the tension you mistake for normal, in the way your heart beats just a little faster around certain people because you don't feel safe being fully human in their presence. And slowly, as you begin paying attention to these small signals, the tightness in your chest, the forced laugh, the conversations that leave you drained instead of understood, you start to realize that protecting your peace isn't selfish at all. It's survival. It's the recognition that your mind is a place you live in every single day, and no relationship, no obligation, no connection is worth turning that place into a battlefield. You begin to see that the world has conditioned you to feel guilty for choosing yourself, as if your well-being should always come second to someone else's expectations. But the truth that emerges in the quiet moments is simple. When you lose your peace, you lose yourself. And when you lose yourself, everything in your life becomes unstable. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call your peace selfish. They will call your distance disrespect. They will call your clarity attitude. But those reactions are not reflections of your character. They are reflections of the comfort they felt when you carried more than your share. And when you stop overextending yourself, the dynamic shifts in a way that forces the truth to surface. The relationships that were held together only by your effort begin to fall apart, and the relationships built on mutual respect become stronger. You begin to notice who respects your silence, who understands your boundaries, who supports your growth, even when it means they cannot access you the same way they used to. Protecting your peace creates a new kind of gravity in your life. It pulls you toward environments where your nervous system feels safe, where your presence is not questioned, where your emotions are not dismissed, where your vulnerability is held with care. And it pushes you away from chaos, away from unpredictability, away from conversations that feel like emotional landmines. You begin to sense, almost instinctively, that peace is not about the absence of problems, but the presence of alignment. Alignment with who you are, what you value, and what you refuse to tolerate anymore. And the beauty of this shift is that it doesn't require grand decisions. It begins with small moments, choosing silence instead of arguing with someone who understands only their own perspective, choosing distance instead of forcing connection, choosing rest instead of proving your worth through exhaustion, choosing truth instead of maintaining an image that benefits others. You start to build a life around what steadies you, not what drains you, and the more you protect that space, the more natural it becomes to say no without guilt, to let go without fear, to walk away without anger. Before you move to the next truth, allow yourself a moment, a quiet, honest moment, to sit with this question: how many times have I sacrificed my peace just to keep someone else comfortable? Let the answer rise, not to judge yourself, but to understand yourself, because understanding becomes the doorway to healing. And here's the shift that begins to rewrite everything inside you. If something threatens the stability of my inner world, then I owe it to myself to step back, breathe, and protect my peace before I protect anyone's expectations of me. And maybe that single decision becomes the beginning of a life where you finally feel at home within yourself. 3. Stop overgiving to people who undergive. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical effort or long days, but from giving more than your heart can sustain to people who only show up when it benefits them. It's the exhaustion that builds slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, because overgiving never feels wrong at the beginning. It feels generous, it feels kind, it feels like proof that you are a good person, someone who cares deeply, someone who holds others gently, even when the world is unkind to them. But as the years pass, you begin to notice a pattern that you once dismissed. The more you give, the less some people offer in return, not because they don't understand what you're doing, but because they've grown comfortable expecting you to carry all the weight while they simply receive. And the truth is, most people who undergive aren't malicious. They've simply learned that you will always be there, always forgiving, always understanding, always the one who adjusts, who stretches, who bends your boundaries to keep the peace. In their minds, your effort is endless, your patience is guaranteed, your energy is renewable. But it isn't. Every time you silence your needs to protect the bond, every time you give more than you can afford, every time you overextend to fill the emotional gap someone else refuses to close, you chip away at yourself, not dramatically but consistently, until a part of you begins to feel small in your own life. The imbalance shows itself in subtle ways. You find yourself checking on people who never check on you. You remember details about their struggles while they forget your own. You show up with sincerity while they show up with convenience. You invest your emotional currency like it has no limit, while they treat your presence like something that requires no effort. And what's painful is not the imbalance itself, but the moment you realize that you've been carrying a relationship alone, believing it was mutual simply because you wanted it to be. Overgiving changes the way you see yourself. It makes you believe that your worth lies in what you offer, rather than in who you are. Instead of asking, "Are they giving to me?" you ask, "Am I giving enough?" Instead of noticing the lack of reciprocity, you imagine that you just need to try harder. Instead of recognizing the unfairness, you convince yourself that patience will eventually create balance. But imbalance doesn't correct itself through effort. It corrects itself through awareness. And that awareness arrives softly, the way sunrise enters a room through the smallest opening. You start to feel the discomfort in your body when someone asks for more than they ever return. You start to notice the tightness in your chest when you realize that your emotional availability has become a resource someone uses without gratitude. You start to sense that a relationship built on your constant giving is not love. It is emotional dependency, and the dependency isn't yours. When you finally begin to value yourself, something powerful happens. You stop giving by default. You pause. You observe. You ask yourself whether the effort is mutual, whether the connection is balanced, whether the relationship is nurturing or draining. And in that pause, the truth reveals itself. Not everyone deserves the level of care you offer so naturally. Not everyone can hold the weight of your sincerity. Not everyone has the capacity to meet you where you've been meeting them alone. Pulling back isn't punishment, it's clarity. It's the recognition that your heart is not an endless reservoir of second chances, reassurances, and emotional labor. It's choosing to give where your giving is met with presence, not where it disappears into silence. It's understanding that love, real love, requires two people showing up, not one person giving until they collapse. So before moving forward, allow yourself to sit with a single question, a quiet one, without judgment, without pressure. If I stopped overgiving today, who would still remain in my life? The answer may not be comfortable, but it will always be honest. And here is the shift that frees you from the cycle. If I notice myself giving more than I receive, then I choose to step back gently, not out of anger, but out of respect for the parts of me that deserve reciprocity. And maybe this is the moment you learn that your heart becomes lighter, not when you give more, but when you give with intention, to those who meet you with the same quiet depth you offer them. 4. Your time, energy, and attention are currency. Spend them wisely. There comes a point when you begin to understand that the most valuable things you possess are not material, not visible, not measurable by anyone else. They are the unseen currencies that shape your entire experience of life. Your time, your energy, and your attention. These three elements determine the quality of your relationships, the direction of your growth, and the state of your inner world. And yet, for years, you may have offered them to anyone who reached for them almost automatically, without stopping to consider whether they deserved that access, or whether their presence in your life contributed anything meaningful in return. It's only when you feel drained, scattered, or strangely disconnected from yourself that you realize how much of your inner wealth you have given away without intention. Time is the one currency you can never earn back. Once it's spent, it leaves a mark, shaping the life you're building quietly in the background. But most people don't feel the impact of wasted time until years have passed, until they look back and realize how many hours, days, or even entire seasons of their lives were poured into conversations that led nowhere, into relationships that stayed shallow, into people who never cared enough to listen deeply or show up consistently. And as you grow older, something inside you shifts. You start valuing the hours you have because you finally understand that a lifetime isn't endless, and what you give your time to, you give your life to. Energy is even more delicate. It's the essence that determines whether you wake up feeling grounded or exhausted, whether you move through the day with clarity or heaviness, whether your heart has space to expand, or whether it remains compressed under obligations that were never yours. You begin to see that the people who drain your energy rarely apologize because they don't sense the weight you carry for them. They only sense your availability. Meanwhile, the people who nourish your energy make you feel lighter without even trying. Their presence feels like a room with more oxygen than the one you just walked out of. And it's in the difference between these two experiences that you start realizing how sacred your energy is and how important it is to offer it intentionally rather than reflexively. Then there is your attention, perhaps the most underestimated currency of all. Whatever you focus on grows inside you. If you give your attention to negativity, chaos, or people who pull you into emotional turbulence, your inner world reflects that chaos. If you give your attention to conversations that uplift you, to habits that build you, to relationships that ground you, your inner world becomes a place where you feel calm, capable, and whole. Attention is not passive. It is the most active force shaping your reality, and the moment you start directing it with awareness, everything in your life begins to move in a different direction. As you connect these pieces, you begin to feel something steady forming inside you, a sense of responsibility for your inner resources. You realize that not everyone deserves your time because not everyone values it. Not everyone deserves your energy because not everyone protects it. Not everyone deserves your attention because not everyone respects its impact. And this realization is not harsh or cold. It's deeply compassionate, because it teaches you to create a life that honors your well-being rather than sacrificing it. You start to slow down. You start to choose carefully. You start to notice the difference between people who leave you centered and people who leave you fragmented. You begin to invest in fewer things, but with more intention. You no longer respond to every message immediately. You no longer say yes to every invitation. You no longer carry conversations that feel forced or one-sided. You replace urgency with presence, chaos with clarity, and emotional noise with stillness. And in this new way of living, something beautiful happens. The right people begin to rise toward you. People who respect your boundaries instead of testing them. People who appreciate your time rather than wasting it. People who value your energy because they sense the sincerity behind it. People who listen, not just with their ears, but with their awareness. People who show up with the same depth you offer. Before you move forward, ask yourself quietly, without pressure, without judgment, where have I been spending my inner currency on people or situations that never deserved it? Let the answer reveal itself gently, because honesty is the first act of reclaiming your life. And here is the shift that begins to restore your balance. If something costs me my peace, my clarity, or my emotional strength, then I must question whether it deserves my time, my energy, or my attention at all. And maybe this is how you begin to build a life where your inner world finally feels like a place worth living in. 5. Walk away from anything that requires you to lose yourself. There comes a moment in every person's life when they stand at a quiet crossroads, not because someone forced them there, but because their soul can no longer carry the weight of being half themselves. It's a moment that doesn't announce itself with noise or drama, but with a subtle tightening in the heart. A sense that something in your life demands more than it should, asks you to shrink more than you can bear, or pulls you so far from who you are that you barely recognize the person you've become in the mirror. And as uncomfortable as that realization is, it marks the beginning of your return to yourself. Because anything that requires you to abandon your identity, silence your truth, or dim the parts of you that make you whole is not love, not loyalty, and not a place meant for your spirit to rest. Losing yourself never happens in one moment. It happens in the small decisions, the ones that seem harmless at first. You stop expressing your opinions because someone always dismisses them. You stop showing your emotions because someone makes you feel too sensitive. You stop dreaming out loud because someone calls your dreams unrealistic. You stop standing up for yourself because conflict exhausts you, and little by little, you begin making adjustments, then more adjustments, until the person you've become feels like a carefully edited version of the human you were meant to be. But one day, usually in a moment when no one is watching, you start to feel the cost of this quiet disappearance. You feel it when you sit alone and realize how far you've drifted from your own values. You feel it when you notice how much energy you spend trying to keep the peace while losing your own. You feel it when your laughter doesn't sound like you anymore. You feel it in the heaviness that shows up in your body long before your mind is ready to admit the truth. And the truth is simple, even if it hurts. Anything that requires you to sacrifice your identity in exchange for belonging is not a place of safety. It is a place of slow erosion. Walking away is not about rejection. It's about remembrance. Remembering who you were before you reduced yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. Before you traded your authenticity for acceptance. Before you learned to hide your needs because you believed they were too much. Walking away doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. It is the moment you decide that your voice matters, your peace matters, your dreams matter, your boundaries matter, and your existence is not something to negotiate in exchange for someone else's approval. Some people will not understand this transformation. They will say, "You've changed," as if change is a betrayal. They will say you're distant, as if distance isn't sometimes necessary for breathing. They will say you're difficult, as if difficulty isn't often a synonym for self-respect. But what they're truly reacting to is the loss of access. Access to the version of you who tolerated too much, bent too easily, and spoke too softly. When you choose yourself, the dynamic shifts, and not everyone can walk with you into the next chapter. But the beauty of this decision is that it doesn't require anger, it requires clarity. Clarity that says, if being close to someone means losing pieces of myself, then that closeness is not a gift. It's a cost I can no longer afford. You begin to realize that your life expands only when you expand, that your future strengthens only when you strengthen, that the relationships meant for you will never demand your disappearance as the price of admission. So allow yourself a quiet moment and ask, not with fear, but with honesty, where have I been trading my identity for connection? And what would happen if I walked toward the version of myself I've been holding back? Let the question breathe inside you. Let it open the door to the truth you have avoided. Here is the shift that begins healing the fracture between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. If a relationship demands that I abandon myself, then I choose distance over distortion, truth over silence, and authenticity over approval. Every single time. And maybe this is the moment when you finally understand that walking away isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning of coming home to yourself. 6. Emotional independence makes you unshakable. There is a certain kind of strength that doesn't show itself in your voice or in the way you walk into a room, but in the quiet steadiness you carry inside your chest. A steadiness that remains even when life becomes loud, even when people disappoint you, even when circumstances try to shake the ground beneath your feet. That steadiness is emotional independence, the ability to feel deeply without becoming controlled by what you feel, the ability to care without collapsing, the ability to love without losing yourself, the ability to stand alone without feeling abandoned. It is not a coldness, it is not detachment, it is not indifference. It is the gentle understanding that your emotional stability is your responsibility, your home, your anchor in a world that can change in a moment. For years, you may have built your emotional world around other people, their reactions, their approval, their presence, their reassurance. You may have believed that your peace depended on someone else's consistency, that your joy depended on someone else's attention, that your worth depended on someone else's validation. And because of that, your inner world felt fragile, vulnerable, easily disrupted. A message left unseen could shift your mood. A tone of voice could ruin your day. A small distance from someone you cared about could make your chest feel tight. You didn't realize it then, but you had handed your emotional well-being to people who were never meant to hold it. But the moment you begin reclaiming your emotional independence, something inside you starts to change in a profound way. You begin to understand that the stability you seek from the outside world must be built within. You start finding comfort in your own presence. You start breathing through discomfort instead of running from it. You start trusting your own judgment rather than waiting for someone else to confirm it. You begin noticing that you can experience fear without freezing, sadness without collapsing, love without losing clarity. You start realizing that everything you once sought from others, reassurance, grounding, direction, validation, already exists within you when you create space to hear your own voice. This shift doesn't make you harder, it makes you softer in a safer way. It allows you to love without the fear of being destroyed. It allows you to help others without drowning in their emotions. It allows you to stay connected without being dependent. It creates a kind of inner security that allows you to show up fully. Not because you need something from someone, but because you want to share who you are, not fill a void you've been carrying. Emotional independence frees you from the roller coaster of other people's unpredictability. When someone pulls away, you don't collapse, you observe. When someone criticizes you unfairly, you don't internalize their voice. You return to your own truth. When someone leaves, you don't lose your foundation. You remain standing because your foundation was never built on them in the first place. You stop reacting instinctively, and you begin responding intentionally. You stop giving people the power to define your worth, and you begin defining it through your own choices, your own boundaries, your own clarity. You start to see relationships differently, not as lifelines, but as shared journeys. You no longer cling out of fear or stay out of dependency. You choose connection because it nurtures you, not because it rescues you. And in that choice, your relationships become healthier, deeper, calmer. The people who remain in your life are no longer there because you need them to fill emotional gaps, but because they enrich the wholeness you already built within yourself. Before you move on, ask yourself in a gentle, honest moment, have I been asking others to hold the emotional weight I was meant to carry myself? Let that question sit with you, not to blame yourself, but to see yourself. And here is the shift that liberates you from dependency. If I feel myself leaning too heavily on someone to manage my emotions, then I choose to pause, return to myself, and rebuild the stability that was always meant to come from within me. And maybe this is the moment when you realize that emotional independence isn't distance, it's freedom. It's the ability to walk through life with a calm, steady heart that no storm can fully break. 7. Respect yourself. Enough to say no without explaining. There comes a time in your life when you begin to understand that the word no is not a wall, not a weapon, not a rejection of love or connection. It is a quiet declaration of self-respect, a boundary drawn not to push people away, but to keep yourself from disappearing beneath the weight of expectations that were never yours to carry. For years, you may have said yes out of politeness, out of guilt, out of fear that someone would misunderstand your intention or question your heart. You may have stretched yourself thin, rearranged your schedule, suppressed your needs, and sacrificed your peace simply because saying no felt uncomfortable, almost like a betrayal. And each time you felt a subtle disconnection from yourself, a sense that you were living in ways that didn't reflect what you truly wanted or needed. But as you grow more aware of yourself, you begin to notice that every yes you give without alignment comes with a cost. It costs your time, your energy, your mental clarity, your emotional balance. It creates resentment where there should have been peace. It builds invisible pressure that eventually turns into exhaustion. You start to realize that saying yes when everything inside you feels like saying no is not kindness. It is a slow act of self-abandonment. And what makes it even harder to see is that the world often rewards people who are always available, always agreeable, always willing to adjust. But beneath that reward is a deeper truth. The more you avoid saying no, the more people learn to expect your compliance without considering your well-being. And then something begins to shift within you, not suddenly, but gently, like a door opening inside your chest. You realize that your boundaries don't need an explanation to be valid. You realize that saying no is not the act of a selfish person, but of a person who finally understands their own value. You realize that you don't owe anyone a justification for protecting your peace, your time, your space, or your energy. Respecting yourself means trusting your inner signals, the heaviness you feel when something isn't right, the resistance in your body, the quiet voice that whispers you're giving too much. You begin to listen to those signals with seriousness, not shame. And the beauty of this transformation is that you don't become harsh or distant, you simply become honest. You begin choosing commitments that align with your capacity, not with other people's assumptions. You begin giving your time to people who honor it. You begin saying no in moments where your younger self would have ignored their own discomfort just to avoid disappointing someone else. And you start to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Spaciousness, room to breathe, room to rest, room to be yourself without the weight of obligations that never belong to you. People may react. Some will be surprised, some may be offended, and some may try to guilt-trip you back into your old patterns, not because they care about your well-being, but because your boundaries disrupt the convenience they once enjoyed. But these reactions are not a reflection of your worth. They are reflections of the dynamics your yes used to maintain. When you stop being the person who always says yes, the balance shifts, and not everyone knows how to handle the version of you who finally respects themselves. And yet, the more you practice saying no without explaining, the more grounded you become. You start to feel present in your own life rather than pulled in every direction. You make decisions from a place of alignment rather than pressure. You no longer allow other people's urgency to become your emergency. And slowly, you build a life that reflects your values rather than your fears. Before you move on, take a quiet moment and ask yourself with full honesty, how many times have I said yes to avoid discomfort, even though saying no would have protected my peace? Let the answer rise without judgment. Awareness is the first act of freedom, and here is the shift that reshapes your sense of self-respect. If a situation requires me to betray my needs in order to say yes, then I choose to say no, clearly, calmly, and without explanation. And maybe this is the moment when you finally learn that your no is not a barrier. It's the doorway to a life built on authenticity rather than obligation. 8. Don't settle for half love, half attention, or half effort. There comes a moment, usually after years of stretching your heart into shapes it was never meant to hold, when you begin to understand that accepting half of what you need slowly teaches your soul that you are only worthy of half of what you deserve. It doesn't happen suddenly. It happens quietly, in the small compromises that appear harmless. The moments when you say, "It's fine," even though it isn't. The conversations where you suppress your needs to avoid tension. The times when you settle for inconsistent effort because you're afraid that asking for more will make you lose what little you receive. And without realizing it, you begin living on emotional scraps, convincing yourself that the fragments of affection someone gives you are enough to build a life on. But half love is not love. Half attention is not connection. Half effort is not commitment. These things may look like something real on the surface, especially when you're lonely or longing for warmth, but they never give your heart the safety, the depth, or the stability it needs to grow. When someone gives you half of themselves, you end up giving double just to keep the connection alive. You overextend, you overthink, you overgive. Not because you want to, but because you feel you must. And slowly, the balance shifts until you're carrying the entire relationship while they simply exist within it. What makes this even more painful is that your heart knows the truth long before your mind is ready to admit it. You feel it in the uncertainty that creeps into your chest when their effort fades. You feel it in the silence that lingers after they disappear for days. You feel it in the way your body tenses when you hope for more, but receive the same minimal presence you've been accepting for months. And still, you stay, not because the situation fulfills you, but because a part of you fears that asking for the full version of love will leave you with none at all. But something shifts the day you finally acknowledge that you cannot keep pouring your whole heart into a space that wasn't built to hold it. You begin to understand that you were never meant to earn love through effort, never meant to chase attention like it's a rare reward, never meant to settle for a version of someone that exists only in potential. You realize that wanting a deeper connection doesn't make you demanding. It makes you human. Wanting consistency doesn't make you needy. It makes you emotionally aware. Wanting reciprocity doesn't make you difficult, it makes you self-respecting. As this awareness grows, you begin to feel the weight of your own worth settling back into its rightful place. You stop mistaking inconsistency for mystery. You stop interpreting mixed signals as something you must decode. You stop believing that patience will transform someone who doesn't intend to show up any differently. Instead, you start recognizing that the love you accept becomes the love you believe you deserve. And that belief shapes every relationship that follows. And the more you value yourself, the less tolerance you have for half effort. You begin to prefer honest distance over pretend closeness. You begin to notice the difference between someone who reaches for you because they care and someone who reaches for you because they know you will always be there. You begin to build a life where the connections around you feel whole, not because they're perfect, but because they're mutual. Before moving on, give yourself a quiet moment to ask, where in my life have I convinced myself that half effort is better than no effort at all? Not to judge yourself, but to see yourself with the honesty you've been avoiding. And here is the shift that restores your emotional balance. If someone offers me only fragments of their presence, their time, or their heart, then I choose to step back and make space for the full love, full attention, and full effort I know I am worthy of. And maybe this is the moment you begin to understand that settling for half of anything slowly teaches the world to give you less, but choosing your worth teaches the world to rise to meet you. 9. Eliminate chaos, confusion, and emotional games from your life. There comes a point in your life when you begin to recognize that chaos is not always loud, that confusion is not always accidental, and that emotional games are not always played with obvious moves. Sometimes chaos arrives in the form of someone whose presence constantly disrupts your inner world, someone whose words never match their actions, someone who turns every connection into a puzzle you're expected to solve while they stand at a comfortable distance. And because the disruption comes and goes in waves, moments of closeness followed by sudden withdrawal, gestures of warmth followed by coldness, promises followed by silence, you find yourself trapped in a cycle that keeps you emotionally unsettled, waiting for clarity that never arrives, and questioning yourself more than the behavior that created the turmoil. Confusion becomes a habit you live with. You replay conversations in your mind, trying to understand what went wrong. You analyze messages, tone shifts, pauses and reactions, as if decoding them will give you peace. You find yourself being careful, too careful, with your words to avoid triggering another shift. And without realizing it, the emotional ground beneath you becomes unstable. You wake up wondering who they will be today. You go to bed wondering if you did something wrong. You start walking around your own feelings, like someone navigating a tight space, holding your breath so you don't disturb the fragile illusion of calm that only exists when you silence your truth. But the moment you begin valuing your peace, something inside you becomes more sensitive, not in a fragile way, but in a wise way. You begin to sense the difference between relationships that feel like home and relationships that feel like weather patterns you can't predict. You begin to recognize that chaos isn't passion, that inconsistency isn't mystery, that emotional games aren't connection. You begin to realize that the people who love you won't leave you guessing, won't make you compete for their attention, won't weaponize silence or affection, won't shift your reality to keep you off balance. Love, in its healthiest form, steadies you. Presence, in its truest form, grounds you. And people who genuinely care for your well-being don't create storms in your mind and call it complication. They show up with clarity that feels like sunlight after years of fog. As this awareness grows, you start hearing the quiet signals your body gives you, the tightness in your shoulders when someone's name appears on your screen, the uneasy feeling that follows a vague message, the sudden rush of overthinking that comes after they give you half an answer. And instead of rationalizing these reactions, you begin listening to them. You begin trusting the wisdom in your discomfort. You begin seeing that chaos is not a sign of depth, it's a sign of misalignment. And confusion is not something you should normalize, it's something that tells you your heart is not safe here. Emotional games thrive only where self-worth is fragile, but the moment you strengthen your sense of value, these games lose their power. You stop trying to interpret mixed signals because you no longer accept them. You stop chasing clarity from someone who benefits from keeping you confused. You stop tolerating inconsistency because you understand that stability is not too much to ask for. It is the minimum requirement for emotional health. And the more you invest in your own peace, the less tolerance you have for anyone who disrupts it, drains it, or tests it. Before moving on, allow yourself a moment of honesty, a real, quiet moment to ask, who in my life benefits from keeping me unsure, and what would my life feel like if I stepped away from their chaos? Let the answer settle gently, because truth often speaks in whispers long before we are ready to listen. And here's the shift that begins transforming your inner world. If someone repeatedly brings chaos, confusion, or emotional instability into my life, then I choose to distance myself without waiting for a final explanation, because peace is clarity, and anything that destroys peace is not mine to carry. And maybe this is the moment when you realize that eliminating chaos is not loss, it is liberation, the return of your mind to a place where you can finally breathe. 10. Choose yourself every time. You are your longest commitment. There comes a moment, usually after you've tried for far too long to be everything for everyone, when you realize with a mixture of clarity and quiet sadness that the one person you've consistently abandoned in order to keep the peace, hold the connection, or meet the expectations of the world is yourself. And it is in that moment, that still, unassuming moment, when everything inside you begins to shift. Because choosing yourself is not about turning your back on others. It's about finally turning toward the parts of you that have been waiting for years to be acknowledged, nurtured, protected, and valued. It is about understanding that you are the only person who will walk with you from your first breath to your last, and that every commitment you make in life begins with the commitment you make to your own well-being. For years, you may have believed that choosing yourself was selfish, that your needs should come last, that your emotions should be silenced, that your boundaries should be flexible, that your dreams should be delayed for the sake of maintaining harmony. You learned to prioritize the comfort of others because you feared that honoring your own truth would create distance, conflict, or misunderstanding, and in the process, you began to shrink, quietly, subtly, until parts of you became unrecognizable even to yourself. You gave so much of your time, your energy, your heart, your patience, your forgiveness, that you forgot what it felt like to ask, "What do I want? What do I need? Who am I becoming?" But the more you grow, the more you understand that choosing yourself is not abandonment, it is alignment. It is the recognition that you cannot give from an empty place, cannot build meaningful relationships while neglecting the relationship you have with yourself, cannot create a life of depth and fulfillment while living disconnected from your own desires. And as this awareness settles into your soul, you begin to notice how your life changes when you start choosing yourself with consistency rather than hesitation. Your boundaries become clearer, not harsher. Your decisions become calmer, not colder. Your voice becomes steadier, not louder. You begin to move through the world with a sense of groundedness that comes from knowing that you are no longer outsourcing your worth to anyone else's acceptance or approval. Choosing yourself means listening to your inner signals, the heaviness that warns you, the discomfort that alerts you, the longing that guides you, the quiet intuition that whispers when something is right or wrong. It means trusting your own judgment even when others disagree, because only you live inside your life. It means walking away from situations that drain you, even if your heart is attached. It means saying yes to the experiences, the relationships, and the futures that expand you rather than shrink you. It means understanding that your peace is not negotiable, your well-being is not a luxury, and your identity is not something you should sacrifice in exchange for belonging. People may not understand your transformation. Some will question it, some will resist it, some will demand the version of you who tolerated more than they deserved. But the beauty of choosing yourself is that you no longer collapse under the weight of their reactions. You no longer define yourself through their comfort or discomfort. You no longer shape your life around their expectations. You begin living from a place of inner truth. And that truth becomes the compass that guides you toward the relationships and environments that allow you to grow without losing yourself. Before you close this journey,